Well, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Got a lot of comments. So, welcome. This is a joint discussion with myself, Shane, and with James from All American Travels. How you doing today, James?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm good, and I'm so glad that we got connected.
Yes, of course. It gives me a chance to learn more about your ships, like we were talking about before. And I know a little bit about Sullivans, mainly due to the being a sister ship to the Kit and whatnot. But
Mm.
you've got two other amazing vessels over there, so I'm ready to be a sponge.
And I'm ready. Yeah. So, for everyone who's listening and watching, if you've watched The Kid, they History TV on the it's on their live section on the Kids and certainly All American Travel site. And you had a great conversation with Tim from The Kid, and so we partnered through Tim to bring everyone this. So thanks for everyone for being here. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your channel? I'm sure you have some fans of yours that are tuning in and things like that. So,
Yep, I see a few of our guys. Hey, guys, and hello, everyone who is seeing me for the first time. Little backstory on my channel. I do photography work on the side. So I started my channel off originally with the intent of it being a photography channel. That wasn't going so well. So I started doing like travel related videos, and I'm a big history fan as well. So I just kind of started intertwining the two. And we're on pace right now. I think at some point next year, we're probably just going to drop the travel stuff and go all in on the history stuff because I've really been enjoying it.
that's good. Like, do you have a segment of history that you'd like to kind of slice and dice up and examine for your subscribers and viewers?
So mainly what I focus on is maritime history, specifically ocean liners, World War II vessels, well, any vessel really, not just World War II vessels. But as far as a historical topic, aside from ships, I really enjoy learning about World War II.
Excellent.
I've been to the National World War II Museum many times, and I can't recommend it enough. Shameless plug for those guys.
Yeah.
I could spend the whole day in a place like that, or at a museum ship, for example. I've been to Kidd, I've been to Alabama, I've been to quite a few of them, and it's so easy for me to just lose myself in those places and just, enjoy it.
Yeah, so that brings up an interesting question that maybe on the Buffalo Naval Park channel, or even when we're doing a Museum Ship Mafia show, that it doesn't really come up. Like you just say, you kind of get lost in it when you're at a museum ship. Like, what does it do, like, to you or for you, or like I'd love now, as a fan, like you're a fan of museum ships, so but you're outside of the you're not working in a museum ship.
Right.
So what does it, what does it bring to you?
It's mostly just like learning about the ships, and again, just being fascinated with ships in the first place. I enjoy reading about all the different events that happened in the ship's lifetime. For example, we talked about Kidd with the the kamikaze attack that happened to the Kidd, or if we're talking about something completely different, one of the Olympic class ships, the Olympic Titanic, just learning about each one. But yeah, more specifically to answer your question about the museum ships, those are special to me because it's not only about learning history, it's you can go on the ship and you can touch it, and you can stand on the spot on Kidd, for example. I know I keep saying Kidd a lot, but I've been there the most. So I can stand on that spot where that kamikaze attack happened and just feel that. I don't know if I'm describing that correctly, but
No, yeah, like it's an interesting perspective, that I'm thankful that we're talking just for that reason. As you as a fan of museum ships, but again, not working in this world, what
Yeah,
draws you to them? And it's that you're on the deck where stuff happened,
absolutely.
right? And it's different than just reading it in a book and or seeing a video about it. Is to actually
It
be
is. Yeah, there's something that you can't replace, as you just said. As I can read about Titanic in a book, but that's all I can ever do. I could go on your ships. I can go on the Alabama, any other ship, and I can learn about that ship and say, well, this happened here and this happened here. Having to be able to touch it tangibly, is just, there's something about it that it feels more impactful to me personally. And I would imagine to some other folks probably the same.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that.
Of
Hey
course.
Cam, hey Wolf, hey Mark. The Blue Riband, nice. Who was the last ship to win the Blue Riband? I can't remember. Eric, hello.
Oh, I think I know the answer to that, but
Oh, nice.
mhm.
Yes. Oh, well, going to visit the Queen Mary sometime soon. That's nice. Apparently, it's nice and haunted, I guess, what people say. Yeah, this is a very dynamic world too. I mean, they're talking about the SS United States. Uh, there's kid and dry dock. So it's a very active community as well. Which is
it's
really interesting.
it's an exciting time in a lot of ways to be a fan of these ships
Mm.
because, like we were saying earlier, when a ship goes in a dry dock, it tends to get a lot more attention than it normally gets. And kids in there right now, Texas is in there right now. Some of your ships are going to be going in, which I know we're going to talk about later on. Yeah, it's just interesting to see because and learn. Well, I know we're going to talk about Sullivans and the partial sinking and all that. Um, it's exciting to see the updates. It really is. That's why every time kid punts something out, I'm like, okay, all right. And then Tim will share pictures, and I can't wait to see that exact same stuff going on with your ships as well.
Yeah, we are. That's a big thing that we've been. I'm just finishing a comment there. Sorry.
Absolutely.
Um, the Yeah, that's something we're very excited about. We're very proud of the fact of with all of the money we've raised from donors and fans, but then also, you know, good majority of the 21 million was raised through the state and federal, and that just came down about a month and a half ago or so that we've crossed the finish line. Although it's never ever done
Wonderful.
with raising money, and now the Sullivans and Croaker, we can begin that conversation with the city. All right, that's an important thing that we need to say is that the city of Buffalo are the owners of the vessels, and they established a nonprofit, the Buffalo Naval Park, to manage the ships on the city's behalf. So we almost become consultants. So the money goes to the city works out all of the contracts with the dry docks themselves, but we are like the expert consultants for the city, giving them information, uh, and our best decision making uh, goals. Because
Essentially, advise them as best you can
advise them
on what to
right
do.
of what to do, and then we probably will still be ancillarily in those conversations, but we are saying, you know this is the work that we want to see done. This is, these are the two dry docks that we could potentially go to, and so
Right.
now it's up to you to negotiate with them, and then of course pay the money. So
Right.
that's kind of how we view ourselves moving forward, and we're very early into those conversations now.
Okay. Great. So Shane, you've got unlike some of the other museums, you have multiple vessels at your museum.
Yes.
Um, and I've been looking at pictures of your of how you've got them situated, and you've got this really big ship. Well, Little Rock. Well, it looks really enormous when you're looking at Sullivans and the Croaker sitting right next to it. Um, how does that work from a behind the scenes perspective? Do you have like an individual at the museum that is in charge of each vessel, or how does that work?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question, and one that probably I don't talk about enough. Um, so, yes, we are the largest inland naval park, freshwater park in the country. We have a very diverse, disparate collection of ships. And then we also have a PTF boat on land and, our yard with rolling stock and airplanes and a helicopter and things like that as well. So other branches are represented at the Buffalo Naval Park. And so we do have on that side, on say the maintenance crew, uh, we do have lead caretakers of each vessel. Now our staff is small; it's about 6 people total. That's full time, part time,
Mhm.
uh, and so each vessel has its own like lead caretaker, and then there's staff that kind of float. The other staff kind of float between depending on what work needs to be done. So we have a
Okay,
lead caretaker of the Little Rock, Sullivans, and Croaker, and then the other staff just gets shifted depending on the workload.
gotcha. So let's talk about Little Rock for a minute, because admittedly, I'm not all that familiar with Little Rock. Can you tell us a little bit about our service history? I know.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding, James. I'm kidding. No, no, no. That's good. I just had to throw that in there.
Of
Of
course.
course. Yes, of course I could talk about our history. The USS Little Rock is an extremely important museum ship because of the era that she represents, right? So she
Okay.
is the last Cleveland class. So there were 26 Clevelands that were kind of saw fruition through World War II. She is one of those 26. And then she was one of 6 that was converted into a guided missile cruiser using the earliest guided missile program in U.S. Navy, part of the 3T program for Terrier, Tartar, and Talos. And so 3 of the Cleveland classes were equipped and had a weapons platform with the Talos. 3 were armed and platformed with the Terrier. But all of those other 5 sister ships are now gone. And so she's the last Cleveland class and the last Galveston cruiser, guided missile cruiser, Galveston class in the world.
So that's
And
what she was reclassified to when she was converted, correct? From Cleveland class to Galveston class?
correct. Yeah, so it's the Galveston class was the Galveston, Little Rock, and Oklahoma City, 3, 4, 5, and then 6, 7, and 8 were the Providence class, which is the Providence, the Springfield, and the Topeka. And then, of course, the heavy cruisers that got guided missiles were 1 and 2. So that's why we, as light cruisers, start with 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Gotcha. What is the major difference between a light cruiser and a heavy cruiser?
Well, that goes all the way back to the treaties, the interwar treaties, the deciding with the ship characteristic board and the general board what type of uh, how heavy a vessel would be. So you have heavy. So they were able under that second London or the first London Treaty, then to break it out into heavy and light. So heavies are able under those treaty agreements were able to carry up to 8 inches, and then lights were able to carry up to 6-inch weapons platform.
Okay.
And
And
they're just heavier, right? There's about I think they're off the top of my head. Heavy cruisers are about 14,000 tons. A light
mhm,
cruiser would be 11 to 12,000 tons.
okay, so yeah, the tonnage, of course, plays into that classification.
All right.
Now, I read this, and I'm glad I've got you on because you can confirm this. there was allegedly a friendly fire incident involving the Missouri. Is that true?
That is true. Yes. In 1946 or late 1945, but I believe it was 1946. They had they had I I think it was, I want to say it was a star shell.
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure.
that penetrated near the bridge area of the Missouri, and I believe it killed about 2 to 3 sailors. On at first, I thought it was the saluting gun, but it's the star shell, and they one accidentally fired, and penetrated around the bridge, the extended bridge, uh, bridge area, and I think 2 to 3 guys perished, I think, because of it on the Missouri.
Wow, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, the Missouri has just, see the signing of the instrument of surrender,
Right.
and
Because that's one thing we didn't touch on. Little Rock was not completed in time for World War II service.
well, she was, but by the time
Okay.
of her shakedown, she was completed in June of 45.
Okay.
And so by the time with her shakedown cruise and everything, it was about August by the time she was really ready. And,
Right.
August 15th was the unofficial surrender of Japan.
Right.
So she was in service for 4 years. So from as a Cleveland from 45 to 49, and then taken out of service and then brought back in 1960 as the Galveston class cruiser, and then served from 60 to 76.
Okay. So she kind of was I don't know if mothballed is the right term, but she was
Put in the
essentially
reserve.
mothballed. Yeah, put in reserve for
OCIR,
okay.
out of commission in reserve.
Okay, I'm gonna have to remember that. I've never heard that one before.
OCIR. Yeah. So she wasn't scrapped. She wasn't removed from the registry.
Right.
And she was, and then refit back in New York, at the New York Shipbuilding. And then that was about a 3-year conversion. And from there, immediately within the year was the flagship of the Second Fleet, the Atlantic Fleet, and then also the Sixth Fleet flagship as well. So in those 16 years that she came back, she was a flagship for about 9.5 of those 16 years, where the vice admiral would be on board.
And that was one of her modifications, right? Because
Hmm.
there was a special, well, maybe not special, but there was a modification was made to have an admiral's bridge made onto the ship so she could be a flagship. Correct.
Correct. Yes, there was a lot of changes, and working with that archaeologist who's come on board, Lucas, we've highlighted some of those. There are more recent videos are going up into the superstructure, and then also adjusting down below on deck, the second deck below the main deck, for those added officer spaces.
Okay.
So it's really interesting that the barbette for turret 62 in her original configuration was removed off of the second deck, but it does continue on the third deck down to the second platform. But they cut out the barbette on the second deck to make more officers living quarters.
Okay. Now, when she's decommissioned for the final time, how did it go about? She was selected for preservation and eventually found her way to your museum. How did that all shake out?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. So when the Buffalo Naval Park was founded, all right, we were talking about the USS North Carolina. Well, we had a local city judge here who visited Wilmington in 1975, and he went on the North Carolina and looked around and said, "Hey, we could do this in Buffalo." Right? Our waterfront at that time had already peaked, and now it was in the low ebb period of history. There wasn't anything down there, but the area that we are in now is the canal side area, which was the home to about 150, it's the merging of the Erie Canal with the lakes.
Mhm.
So that became like the forwarding and transportation and logistical center of the country, moving product from the east into the Great Lakes, because the boats that you could have on the Great Lakes are not the same boats that can traverse the Erie Canal. So you had to take everything on a canal boat or a packet boat, drop it off in Buffalo, put it on a lake freighter, and get it out there. And then reverse with natural raw product like grain and cattle and lumber, all coming coming east from the west to go off of a lake freighter onto a packet boat to go on to New York and Boston and Philly and things like that. So that was kind of like I digressed, but that's kind of the history of our area there. And so there wasn't anything there by that time. I mean, that area was founded in 1820s, 1830s, and then had life until 1950 or 1960, and then just abandoned. And so when he came back, he said, "Oh, this is maybe something we could do there." He started appealing to the mayor of Buffalo, some other city organizations, urban renewal organizations, and nonprofits and things like that. And we were originally interested in the USS Bakuna. So they had a sub on their mind from very early on, even before the Sullivans or the Little Rock. The Bakuna ended up at the Independence Seaport Museum in Philadelphia. So she was loaned and given from the Navy, and that organization signed, took the acceptance of the Bakuna. So that kind of left us a little swaying in the wind. And so we said, "Oh, but there is the Sullivans, okay, huge Irish population in Buffalo. That might be a nice connection for the Buffalonians and the Sullivan ship itself." So we were planning on going, and the organization at the time went to Philadelphia. They got the certificate of acceptance. They signed it, and the Navy kind of said, "Oh, by the way, the Little Rock has just recently been taken out of commission." That was November 22nd, 1976. We're going in June of 1977. So they said, "Well, she's a pretty ship. There's a nice history. Do you want her as well?" And so we said, "Bring out the certificate of acceptance." And so
Why not?
So it was like a 2-for-1. There are other vessels now, looking back and knowing the history a little bit more. There are other ships that sometimes a very small part of me says I wish we could have taken as well. But the biggest one being the Northampton, the CLC-1, which was the presidential emergency ship in case there was a nuclear war. That would have been, it had one extra deck on it, which I find so fascinating. That would have been an interesting ship to get. But to have the USS Little Rock as the last Cleveland in the world, the last Galveston or Providence in the world, makes her such an important ship. And again, that snapshot in time of that early 60s technology, the guided missile technology that is so archaic today, but so state of the art back then.
Right. Since you mentioned with this story, you made me think of something else. It's been mentioned that certain ships, and I know they get this a lot over there in Baton Rouge, about are you gonna fix the engines? Is she gonna run under her own power again? And I know certain contracts, and they're not all the same. Some of them state that you can use the engines. Some of them state that you cannot. Am I right on that?
I can't speak to other museum ships, but usually the contract, especially back in the 70s, was as is, where is.
Okay.
So you take her as she is where she is. And the Navy does a lot of work cutting systems, taking out equipment so you can't drive her around the lake or, an ocean or something like that. To my understanding, that would represent that we are not allowing you to drive it anywhere.
Gotcha.
And so our equipment, certainly not most, but a lot of the fuel oil had been removed. The hydraulic fluid has just started to drain in various places. And, a lot of our videos on our channel show that sort of stuff. And of course, if you're walking around and all of a sudden you stick to the deck, you're walking in some oil or hydraulic fluid or something. So in certain those areas. So I guess, I don't know maybe as a whole what the Navy did with each individual museum ship, but I know for ours it was take as is, where is. And so that kind of represents we're going to cut her enough to you can't do anything.
Absolutely. That brings me to another question.
Sure.
And I've heard you guys talk about this a lot on the History X shows, and I mentioned it to Tim to get his thoughts on it as well. You guys have used the term interpretive year a lot for your vessels.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that? Like what it is, what does that term mean, and what does it specifically mean for Little Rock?
Yeah. We are very late to the party with that. I don't know what prior administrations and what other staff were doing, but museum ships have been picking an interpretive year for well before we have done. And I just said, you know what, we need to do that as well. And so for the kid, their interpretive year is, I believe, August or July of 45.
August of 45.
Yeah. August of 45. And for our vessels, World War II is what everyone loves to hear and read about, but 90% of their service was in the Cold War. And our vessels, all three of them have been so modified out of the World War II configuration that it would be almost impossible. It would be impossible to bring them back. We're not going to be getting 3 6-inch turrets, for the Little Rock anytime soon, nor are we going to be taking off, the missiles, the Talos. So I have picked years for all three of our vessels that are Cold War years, pardon me, that have something important that can tell the story. Now, we have a lot of work to do, and this really has to begin cascading through our staff and our docents, right? So I really need to get more buy-in from the staff. And I think really focusing on when the ships, especially for the Croaker and the Sullivans, when they come back, that is something I can really focus on when they come back from a ship's maintenance dry dock period. So you pick a year, and then you build the story of the vessel around that year, and it makes it much more cohesive for the visitor. You can tell stories in different spots from that year. Now, it has to be a pretty well documented year, and I'm taking a little risk with 1959 for the Croaker, because we don't actually have a lot of material from that year in our collections. But that doesn't mean I can't find it somewhere. I just don't have it at my fingertips, in our collections as it's currently constituted.
Right.
But that's what it does for the visitor, which is where I come at this from, is the visitor experience. And then you can talk about some of those modifications, right? It's amazing that, like we were talking about with other submarines and things, that some are completely untouched, like the cod just was being used as a training vessel, and then they just put it on the dock at Cleveland and left it. Right? I mean, it's ours have a much more complex history. Not to say that they don't have a history at all, right? They certainly served, but we have a little more complex history with all of our modifications and shipyard work over those years.
Now, you mentioned the Croaker. let's kind of switch over to the Croaker for a minute, if you don't mind. So, yeah, get the little buffering thing going.
The circle of death.
Right,
Yeah,
right. So, Croaker, she and we were talking about this before we came on the air. She is an SSK submarine as she exists currently. Is that correct?
Correct. She is in her SSK configuration, though her designation went back to just SS.
Correct.
So that was an early modification to address the vastly different needs, the vastly different technologies, switching from sinking supply ships with the Japanese Navy to now tracking Russian submarines. And the U.S. Navy had with their studies had said that the Russians are going to be exploding their submarine construction. And, 250 submarines a year for 10 years, something crazy like that. And they said, we are going to get left behind. And so original designs for SSKs were very small, just one torpedo tube in the front, one torpedo tube in the back. And
wow.
About 350 tons. And we would just kind of overwhelm them like killer bees, right? Just with smaller vessels that could just attack or track in multiple areas, kind of all at once. And that never really, hit the shipyard. So they did convert a bunch of Gatos. Ours was they did a type. There were two different types. There was a type 1, which happened to be the USS Growler. And they made some changes, a test boat, so to speak, an experimental, but not right from scratch, but an experimental submarine. And then that went well, and they came out with the type 2s, of which the Kavala, which we've mentioned,
yes.
at least offline,
yes.
in Texas, and the Croaker are the last remaining in that configuration. And that work was done from about 51 to 53. What they wanted to try and solve was to extend the sonar as far as possible while quieting the boat as much as possible as well. So some of the major changes were taking the sonar away from the bottom of the vessel that used to sit in the forward torpedo tubes. You'd have the periscope drop down into the flashlight, 15 degrees at a time, all the way around, and you're only seeing what's in that searchlight, to a much larger transducer array in the bow that would be able to extend, and the electrical current would kind of be like a chessboard. It would go from here to here to here to here to here to here all at once. And so instead of having just like a searchlight, 15 degrees, 15 degrees, 15 degrees, what you would have would be this cascade of sonar work going from transducer to transducer, and it would light up like a checkerboard. So that would carry on farther out with a much wider degree, literally like degrees, right? And so that was one of the biggest things, was they wanted to extend the sonar out with as little interference as possible. And then also to quiet the boat, certainly you have to remove the double reduction gears. So they removed those and added slow motor generators. So the Croaker and the Kavala are slower than they were in World War II. But that helped quiet the vessel. And they removed an engine. They included a snorkel system now, because by that time, U.S. technology was, had the ability to build an intake and exhaust for a snorkel and things like that. So.
So how close? And I know they're both SSKs, but there are even in those configurations. Do you know of any major differences between Croker and Cavallo, or are they essentially identical?
That's a great question, and I've got to get down there and visit.
Okay,
uh,
gotcha.
I've not been there. I mean, I've looked at photos, but that doesn't help any. It is interesting that usually a place to meet is our Hinza symposiums. Uh, where many museum ships gather from around the country, and you spend 4 or 5 days together getting to know someone, talking about your ship, their ship, differences. And really it's so important in our industry to build those relationships, and you have to work them, you have to massage them. You can't just I'm not the type of guy to just say, yeah, I'll talk to you soon, and then never talk to them, right? Like
Right.
you have to build the trust with
Absolutely.
them. You have to be there for them, and then eventually it builds into a really great relationship. And that's something that I find extremely important, because lessons
Mhm.
learned are all over the country, right? Of
Oh, of
different things,
course. Of
different weather
course.
patterns, all of that. So I'm remiss. I've never met anyone from the Cavallo or the Stewart at our symposium. And if someone else knows, if like Tim or someone's watching, uh, Tim, you better be watching. Uh, that maybe they
Right.
have been there and I've just never met them or something, which I would be
Okay.
embarrassed about if that's true. But so I don't know the differences. They're both type 2. So
Mhm.
I would think it's almost very, if not identical, but very
Right.
similar. Um, some of the other big changes were they took out 2 torpedo tubes, because you have that big transducer on the bow, kind of what I call
Right.
the Jimmy Durante nose kind of thing, because it's just like this bulb.
Mhm.
And then they had to raise the BQR3, the hydrophone, because the bow grew so much from the point, like you'd see on a normal ship, to this rounded thing. They actually then had to raise the BQR3 hydrophone, so it could extend out without interference. I mean, just all these little add-ons that something affects something else that affects something else.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess I just have to get down there to the Gavala.
Eric's got a question.
Oh, let's see.
What does the K in SSK denote?
Yeah, that's a great question. Usually everyone just says SSK is hunter killer. So
Mhm.
maybe killer.
That's what I would have
I
thought.
Yeah, I've never actually thought of it. I just say like SS is submarine, so it's submarine killer, maybe
Mhm.
SSK.
Which I've always
It's
wondered about that too. Destroyers are DD, battleships are BB, and so forth. Why,
Yeah,
why the two
yeah. That's
letters?
Well, it's the Navy, man.
Right.
I just think you know what? I've read a little bit about that, but it just seems as though they just doubled up because they knew that there would be more maybe that would be coming out, and not meaning of the like a battleship, a BB,
Right.
but there might be other B variants, right? And
Mhm.
so you're extending out that index just one more on a spreadsheet, so
Right.
everything just isn't a B. You have a BB, but then maybe you have a BC for battle cruiser, right? And so therefore you still have the B,
Right.
but then the second letter can be changed or adjusted to denote a difference. So that's kind of what I've always thought about it was, or how to think about it would have
Mhm.
been, adding that extra B if you're building out a spreadsheet or being librarian nerdy like I am now, like that gives you that extra letter to make adjustments.
Understood. Yes, Steve's got a question. Steve is the blue
I found my
ribbon.
glasses. Hello.
Uh, was the Croker's conning tower much of a blind spot for the sonar?
That's a great question. Was the conning tower much of a blind spot for the sonar? No, I don't believe so. But when you have it underneath, like in World War II, you also have a lot of pump equipment and auxiliary equipment and a lot of motors running. So that could potentially cause some interference. The the Type 1 SSK, the Growler, they actually built what we have on our bow, they actually built that around the conning tower itself. Not the conning, but the sail itself.
Okay.
And then they found that was just the absolute wrong spot for it, because underneath all of that is the control room, the pump rooms, and all of that stuff. So that all of that stuff that could make whirring and blurring noises and all of that. So
right.
That was one of the major changes with the Type 2. And one of the reasons why we cut our pump room, or not we, but the Croaker, the pump room got cut in half, and that's where the sonar room was placed, down below the control room. And a lot of the auxiliary pumps were put in the forward engine room. So hope that helps.
So same question for Croaker that we had for Little Rock. Well, this is actually two questions. The interpretive year for the Croaker, and in what order did you receive the vessels at the museum?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so the ships arrived. So we went to go pick up the Sullivans first, and then they said, "Hey, take the Little Rock." And we said, "Hey, yeah,
Right.
That's great." So the Sullivans arrived first on the 4th of July, 1977. The Little Rock arrived 2 weeks later on the 15th, roughly 10 days, 11 days later, on the 15th of July, 1977. And then we had this large unveiling party on that Sunday. I believe it was the 17th, where about 3,000 people showed up, and we said, "Hey, here's some ships, right? And now we're going to shut it down for 2 years, work on them, and we'll see you again in 1979. What a fabulous year, right? So those were the first two vessels that arrived. They came from Philadelphia through St. Lawrence Seaway. Now you're in Lake Ontario. Then you can cut across to the Welland Canal, which connects Lake Ontario with Lake Eerie. They cross the canal and then into Lake Eerie and then into the Buffalo River.
Okay.
The Croaker was a museum. So she was stricken from the registry in 71, though she was pretty much taken out of service by 68. And she became a museum ship in Groton, Connecticut. There was a guy who was a bubblehead during World War II. He was a real estate developer. I think he built strip malls or strip plazas. And he said, "Hey, let's get the Croaker and put her on display." So he kind of personally oversaw this, just opened the doors, charged $3 a head, and just let people walk through. That was in about 1977 as well. And then by about 1985, conversation is beginning about getting the Nautilus, right? The first nuclear-powered submarine. And everyone just drops the Croaker like a hot potato. They're now focused on getting the Nautilus as a museum ship, which of course they were successful with, and it still could be seen today. But then, the Croaker kind of became the passé
right.
vessel. So it went into a lot of neglect. And the Navy at that time, they clawed back ships. They clawed her back and made her available to the museum ship world. And we were fortunate enough to finally fulfill that desire of getting a submarine that goes back to the Bakuna back in 1975. And in 1988, the sub arrives, and then she goes on display in 1989.
That's an interesting thing, because that's another thing I've always heard about the Navy. And I don't know if this is true or not, but I'd always heard this thing about the Navy supposedly had it written in contracts where whoever was in charge of, the ships, be it your museum, the Alabama, the Kid, whatever, if the ship went into a certain level of disrepair, the Navy could seize the ship back from you.
Mm-hmm. And I believe that they did that with the Croaker, and I believe that they would have done that back in the 70s and 80s. I do not believe they would do that today.
Right.
Just way too much money for it. And then what you'll end up with is exactly what happened with the Clamagore. the Patriots Point says we are going to scrap her. We cannot take care of her anymore. And then you have this groundswell of support that says, no, let's not do that. Let's raise money. We have passionate submariners that are interested in keeping it. And then all of a sudden it goes all the way up to the Supreme Court of South Carolina. And then the decision is made from there. So it's an unfortunate circumstance for the Clamagore that could not be rectified in another way. But that is exactly probably how it would go about today. Now, could the Navy come in? There's certainly a lot of talk, not from us, but there was a lot of talk out there in the world when the Sullivans sank. Should we scrap? Not us, but we weren't saying that. But there was a lot of people saying you should just scrap it. You should just scrap it, right? Or the Navy should just come in and take it over and just scrap it. Well, scrapping itself would be about $4 million. So, all right. Of course, that's not even a conversation that we put on the table. We didn't even let that
Shane, I think your camera froze. Did we lose connection? Steve, okay. So it's not just me. I'm not the only one seeing this, correct? Can you guys still see me? Teresa, this is what happens when you talk about scrapping the Sullivans. Oh, he just came back for a second. Okay, Eric, you can see me. Shane, if you can hear me, it looks like you froze up. We're not seeing or hearing you.
now.
Yes, there you go.
Sorry about that, everyone. I don't know what happened there.
No, you're good. We can see you now. Yes.
Okay, we're still live. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I thought the stream actually ended. Okay. Yeah.
Teresa has a great comment. She says, "This is what happens when you talk about scrapping the Sullivans."
Bingo. That is right. Good call, Teresa, because that's some bad news. And again, as I was mentioning, welcome. Thanks, everyone. Hi. There's some good comments here that we hope to cover. Jolie has, so how did you get the Croaker from Connecticut to where you are? Right. Same path as the Little Rock through the St. Lawrence Seaway into Lake Ontario, into the Welland Canal, into Lake Erie. So same way. So sorry about that, everyone. I'm sorry I scared you. I don't know what happened. It never, like that little antenna thing never went away from my internet, but I'm looking at the modem now. Don't go down again.
We were joking about that earlier. Let's not jinx ourselves again.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. Absolutely, James. I appreciate that. So they. Oh, well, the place I remember we left off was the Croaker. Oh, the Clamagore, the Sullivans, scrapping all that stuff. Yeah.
There was no conversation on you guys' end as far as scrapping the Sullivans, but other people were having that discussion.
Oh my God. Yes. Again, that was never an option that we even considered at all.
Thank goodness.
But I know, but I know that there was a lot of talk out there in the world, that said, just get rid of her. Just get rid of her. Right. So, of course, that was a big concern with the Sullivan family as well. And again, that got into a little bit about who owns the vessels. Right.
Right.
So we would say, no way. We don't even let that conversation into a room. But the Sullivan family said, but you guys don't actually own the ships. The city owns the ships, and they may decide to scrap her. And we said, oh, yes, that might be a possibility. But again, we kind of turned into consultants, and we made it very clear that would not only hurt the museum ship world, community around the country and the world.
Big time.
But that would, what mayor or city government wants that on their heads either, So
Oh yeah.
I think that we were to scare the bejesus out of them enough to say, yes, that's not an option. And they just embraced our mantra of we stick together, don't give up the ship, and failure is not an option.
Exactly. No, thank goodness. And I guess that's a good transition right there. We haven't talked really much about the Sullivans yet. So, the story of how the ship got its name is as fascinating as it is tragic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'll let you tell the story because it's a significant part of World War II history, as far as I'm concerned.
It is. It's and what we work towards is trying to have people also understand the importance of that. There are many people that know the story left and right. Speaking of collaborations, I've gotten to know the people at the Sullivan Brothers Iowa Military and Veterans Museum. That is in Waterloo, Iowa, where the five brothers are from. And now we do a lot of partnering. They get out stuff from their collections. So kind of that collaboration again is they have family material up until the commissioning of our ship, and then we can take over the story with the ship and its service itself. So it really makes for a wonderful partnership. And I'm so thankful to specifically Nick, who works there, and he and I were just talking today, as a matter of fact. But so the Sullivan family were well known right from January of 1942, when all five of them stepped into the recruiting station in Waterloo, Iowa. Their picture was spread throughout the country. The Navy needed men, right? They needed men on board. Everyone asks if there was a Sullivan's Law or, what about the family separation policy? To go from 350,000 officers and enlisted to 3.5 million officers enlisted, they made a lot of concessions. All right. So the tragedy of the Sullivan's family is singular and unique, but there were brothers on ships all over the place, and just not that many brothers all at the same time.
Right.
The Juno itself, which is the ship they were on, which was lost the 13th of November, 1942, today, as a matter of fact.
Oh my goodness, you're right. I didn't even notice that.
So it's thankful that we're talking about this and remembering.
Wow.
There were 8 other sets of brothers on the Juno. The largest one being the Rogers brothers. All right. So they get put on, they go to the recruiting station January of 42. They're being commissioned along with the ship in February of 42, 9 months almost to the day, because it's Valentine's Day when the ship goes into service. Almost 9 months to the day, the ship is lost. November 8th, 5 days before, the Navy goes to the Sullivan brothers and the Rogers brothers, all right, saying they have Navy intel. They know that there's another fleet coming to try and raise Guadalcanal and relieve the Japanese soldiers and sailors that are around Guadalcanal. So they say there's going to be another battle. We would like you to separate. And the Rogers brothers from Connecticut actually do separate. 2 disembark, 2 stay on board. The 2 that stay on board, of course, perish. The 2 stay in the Navy for the rest of the war. They survive, and terrible survivor's guilt the rest of their lives. The 5 Sullivan brothers say, no, of course, we're not doing that. How can you have, it's an odd number. How can you have 1 person go home, 2 people go home, 3 are lost, 4 are lost? You see where I'm going with that. Yeah. I would not expect the brothers at all to be, say, the one survivor who goes home, or two out of the three. How does that happen, and how does that work with the family? And the brothers, they were their own gang, right? They were always, even though the ages were very disparate, they were always together. And you fought with one of them, all of a sudden the four other Sullivan brothers are behind your back, right? So they were a clan right from childhood, and the family nurtured that behavior, and there's no other way, if they had to go down, that they would have gone down separately. So, and then FDR hears about it. There's so much more with Alita Sullivan. There's rumors going around Waterloo because obviously it's World War II. So there are other sailors who live down the street. They're writing to their mothers and dads. Oh, I think the Sullivans are gone. I think the Juneau sank, because none of it was coming out because it was so bad that the U.S. government was holding on to information quite a bit. And so then families would go visit Alita and Tom and say, my son just wrote me a letter that the Sullivan boys are gone. So she writes a letter to the Navy, and FDR writes back within 8 days, which is astounding at that time, with all of the correspondence going back and forth in Washington, through the federal government, through the Navy Department itself, millions of correspondences and letters. She gets a letter back confirming, getting the words of comfort that they are missing. And then he says, we got to strike while the iron is hot, and let's name a ship after the brothers, and it will become a propaganda tool, and a revenge ship, of course, as well.
Yes, of course.
So, down the way she goes, the 4th of April, 43, christened by the mother, because it's an Irish family in Iowa. Tom, the father, his youngest brother, serves aboard the Sullivans during World War II, because there was 9 members of Tom, the father. He had 8 brothers and sisters. He's the top of the chain. Patrick was the bottom of the chain. So there's 15 years difference or so. And he enlists and is on the vessel honoring his nephews, which is amazing. Another singular thing in World War II in the Navy.
That's amazing. And you in that story you mentioned what did you call it, the separation policy? Is that what? Can you elaborate on that a bit? Because as I understood it, it's essentially the name kind of is self-explanatory. I would think under normal conditions, the 5 brothers would not have been allowed to serve together on the same vessel. Am I right on that?
I think if it was a peacetime, like the interwar period, they probably would have split them up. There is, and this is at the Grout Museum District, there is an interview with the officer that made that final call to say, let them serve, right? There's, and I don't have, it's a little murky for me, right? Because I haven't seen any of those records, but I think they walk in, they say, we're going to serve together or we're out of here. And, I think the Navy just is like, well, I don't think that's going to happen. And they actually turn around and leave. And then they decide to go back again a few days later. And I think, I think they're talking to a CPO, a chief petty officer. He refers it up to the officer in Des Moines, Iowa. So like the headquarters of the recruiting in Iowa itself. And I believe it's he who makes the final call to say, get them on board the same ship. And again, use it as a propaganda tool. Of course, it's the propaganda, not in a negative way, right? It is a feel-good story. And so he makes the final call, something, of course, he regrets then. And I think the Grout Museum District in Iowa has an interview with that officer, like later in life. talking about his regret.
I can't imagine the guilt that poor man must have felt over that.
Yes. And to be the officer to deliver the news with the chaplain, just to have that family wiped out. And we have, Kelly Sullivan, the granddaughter of the youngest, Albert, visits us every couple of years, and we stay in contact with emailing and calling once, 3 times a year just to say hi and check in.
That's wonderful.
She says, I'm an Irish family. I had a large Irish family, but I don't anymore. So she has no uncles. She has no cousins. She has no. Now, again, they did have a daughter, Genevieve, who did have 2 children that are now maybe in their mid-70s. But if I'm remembering right, I don't believe they ever got married either. So that from Genevieve, so you had 7 children in all. One died in roughly at birth, maybe 2 to 3 months later. Then you have the 6 others, Genevieve and the 5 boys. The 5 boys are gone. And so that just leaves Genevieve. But Albert was married, and he did have one son named Jimmy. And then Jimmy has 2 children, Kelly and John, that are now both in their roughly mid-50s.
Mm-hmm. And Albert was the only one that had a child, correct?
Correct. Okay. The other boys, it's so hard to, you want to analyze this family. You can read, you can watch the Fighting Sullivans movie. Why they never got married, I don't know. Maybe they were focused on other things in their life. They dated. I mean, there's evidence that other brothers were courting women, during the time in service or right beforehand. But Albert, he just wanted to, quote, settle down a little bit. So he got married at very young. And Catherine Mary Roof Sullivan was also very young, and they had Jimmy.
Some people just want to advance to that next stage of the life faster than others.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, a couple of them were in a motorcycle club, not a gang, but like a club, and they would like to go racing and all that stuff. And so maybe they just like to dance and have a good time. And
sure.
Things like that.
You're in that college age, and we've all been in that stage at one, whether we went to college or not. What your early 20s were like.
Yes, absolutely. Good call. I like that.
You all cut loose for a little while,
Yeah, absolutely.
But going on to the ship itself, I know not much about her service history, but she sailed with some pretty other famous ships at one point in time or another. I know she sailed with New Jersey at one point. Iowa. She refueled with Enterprise at one point, and there was another ship. I'm drawing a blank, but there was another one that of note. I was like, oh wow, she sailed with that one, and the name is escaping me right now.
Well, yeah, you are. She was part of Task Force 38 or 58, depending whether it was Halsey or Spruance, right? And right from January 44, those 9 major engagements from Marshalls all the way up to Okinawa. And then she was sent back with about 90 other destroyers. She was sent back to the West Coast to get refit her AA package, or anti-aircraft package, because all war gaming and war plans had Japan not surrendering until about 47 or 48. So it makes sense that they would send in 45, they would send 90 destroyers back. For the Sullivans, that meant the removal of the quintuple, the forward Mark 14 quintuple torpedo tube, and the addition of quad Bofors and the midships. And then she was getting prepared to go back to the Pacific, and Truman, because he was not Roosevelt, said, oh, we're going to drop the bombs, right? And that sped along the Japanese surrender, of course. If we were planning on, there were operations and plans in place for invading the home islands of Japan. And when you talk about how devastating that would have been, I mean, urban warfare, getting attacked by grandmothers with pitchforks, and we just have to,
Right.
that would just have been all of it's devastating, but more devastating. Because at that time in Japan culture, men and women went to a military school when they were younger. So they each had a basic understanding of military rules and engagement. And I mean, yeah, street by street. We've seen it in more recent conflicts, house by house.
Right.
That was I believe, one of the major decisions for Truman to say, oh, yeah, no. So they were back getting refit. But yeah, she was, to circle back, sorry, James, that she was part of Task Force 38 or 58, depending on Spruance or Halsey.
Right. Now, after the war, of course, she goes to serve in the Korean War, and she served in the Cold War. At what point did she start getting the modifications that she has currently? Were those in phases, or did those things all happen roughly the same time frame?
Yeah, that's a great question. I just saw Sir Booms a lot. Sullivans had a collision with the Massachusetts. Yes, we did. We collided with that beautiful South Dakota class battleship during World War II. Yeah, Big Mammy. And we even have the weld to prove it still.
Wow.
So oh my God. I'm so sorry.
You're good.
I can't get diverted. Well, I'm sorry. Could you repeat the last? I'm sorry.
At what point did the Sullivans start receiving the modifications she has today?
Thank you. So certainly, she was put out of service in reserve, OCIR, right? Out of commission in reserve in 46, as with 90% of the other vessels right off the bat. She was brought back, and her refits began in 51 for the Korean conflict. Now you're beginning different ASW, anti-submarine warfare, and obviously threats in the air are changing with the growth of the jets. And so the first refits start in about 51. Then they go to Korea. It's an around the world cruise with 7 other small boys, 7 other destroyers. They're gone for roughly 230 days or so, with about 4 months in Korea, shelling northern Korea. Then they come back, and the next major refit is 54. And that's when they remove the quad Bofors from midships. They change the directors, and they add 3 3-inch 50s in the spots where the Bofors were. So the Hedgehogs get put on earlier. One of the first modifications, the Hedgehogs for anti-submarine work, off just below the bridge. Then the 3-inch 50s get put on, 2 mid-waist, 2 midship, 1 on the aft deck house. And then in 1961, they have another refit where the Mark 15 quintuple torpedo is removed, and they put on the ASW triple torpedo tubes.
That raises a question, and I wanted to ask Tim this as well when I talked to him. That's one thing Kid and Sully have in common. And I'll bring my little model in here to show you. If they have, both of them have these aft torpedo tubes here.
Yes, that's the Mark 15.
And at some point, I believe they both had another set forward, but they're gone from both ships. Well, what was the reason for removing those?
Well, I could certainly speak to the Sullivans that that was part of that July 1945 refit, was to say we're going to be back in the Pacific for another 2 to 3 years based on the war plans, right? That Japan won't surrender until 47, 48. So we've got another 2.5 years of this. Kamikazes are a huge threat. And so we are going to add quads. This is the Pacific. We don't really need torpedoes. We're not in the Atlantic, right?
Right.
So let's face our threats where we are, which is in the air.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah.
And so they removed the Mark 14, the forwardmost quintuple, and then the Mark 15 was removed later. And of course, within that, when they add the 3-inch 50s, they remove the Sullivan's Mount 53, the forward-facing 5-inch, for the gun director for the 3-inch 50s.
Now, she also has what I'm calling a tripod mast right behind the bridge.
She does.
What is on that mast? What purpose does it serve? Because that is, of course, something that came after World War II.
Well, she has updated. She has updated ANSPS 6 and an updated ANSPS 10 radar up there. There was also some electronic countermeasures added there and along the funnels as well. So yeah, Huff Duff, IFF. So all of that updated technology. And so it was getting a little heavy up there. And so they built the tripod as opposed to a single mast. So the kid has a tripod?
No, it doesn't.
Okay, bingo. Okay.
Kid still has the single mast.
It still has the single mast, which makes sense, right? I'm so glad to hear that, because I would have given Tim a lot of flack if they had a tripod mast, but they're saying 1945, right? So that's why we would never be able to go back to 1945 World War II, because we are missing one 5-inch gun. So
right. So that I guess we can maybe start transitioning into the dry dock stuff if you want.
Well, sure, yeah. Tell me more. Let's talk.
Well, again, going back to that term, we started off with interpretive year. Firstly, what is Sullivan's interpretive year? And when you're going back into dry dock, specifically with the Sullivans, I know Sullivans and Croaker are both going, but with the Sullivans, are you capable of walking her back any further, or she is as she is?
Thank you. Great. That's a great question, James. So I don't know if I even gave it to you for the Little Rock. So just very quickly, I will go over all of the interpretive years.
Okay.
For the Little Rock, it's 1975. Now, why was that year chosen? Because looking through her history, what I was trying to do was to say these years can highlight a very important year within the Cold War. And so 1975 for those years was an important year, because that's the year the Suez Canal reopened after the fight with Israel. So it had been filled with old war material, just sunken boats, and it was not able to be used. And that is a world commerce site, right? To go from the east into the Mediterranean. And so it affected the whole world when that was closed. And so the USS Little Rock helped coordinate the cleaning up, so to speak, of the Suez Canal, and then reopened it, and was the first American ship, I believe, the first ships to traverse. There were 3. It was the president's ship, a governmental yacht, and then the Little Rock. So that's an important year in terms of Cold War history, was the reopening of the Suez Canal. The Croaker, 1959, because by that time, every sub that we were constructing here in America was an SSK, for lack of a better word. So they were building new ones that had SSK technology that were supplanting the Gatos that were converted. And so we went back to an SS designation, and also the fact that Russian technology had overtaken submarines like the Croaker. So we were not doing hunting, killing, tracking, and targeting Russian submarines like we were. They had bypassed us, and so we just went to more traditional fleet duty. So that's an important transition in the Cold War, the 1959, because we were overtaken by our own construction and the construction of the Russians. For the Sullivans, it's 1962. Anyone have an idea in the comments of why that would be? And if you know it already, don't say it. So
I admit I don't know, but I know that is Kidd was commissioned 2 years later, and then Sullivan's was decommissioned 3 years later.
Correct. So in 1962, in October of 1962, what was happening? The Cuban Missile Crisis.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yes. So we were part of the blockade. The Sullivan. I keep saying we. I'm sorry. That makes a lot of people upset. Just vernacularly, I just say we. Yes, it was not me. All right. Let me put that out there for everybody. But the vessel was part of the blockade for the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so what bigger event in Cold War history is there than the Cuban Missile Crisis?
Right. Absolutely.
So we have to, yes, Jolie, thank you. You got it. So what bigger, and I have petitioned the various Navy departments to get, now this, I'm shifting kind of to the dry dock question. For the Sullivan specifically, what we can do and what I've been working on is I have finished the application to get 2 more 3-inch 50s for the midship.
Okay.
Right, on the 01 level. When the ship came, she was naked, so to speak. And at that time in 1977, 1978, 1979, before the ship opened, there was a lot of bartering back and forth. Things were a little more fluid than they would be today. Things are a little more, recorded and not streamlined, but codified a little bit. So our forefathers just said, hey, let's get a couple Bofors and throw them up there, right? Just to put something up there. Well, those were not there for most of her career, or not most, but for 12 years of her career, they were not there, roughly. And so I want to take the twin Bofors and remove them and add 2 more 3-inch 50s. So there was some talk that there is a ship in Philadelphia in the inactive shipyard that does have 2 3-inch 50s. And so I have completed the application, which is rather extensive. It's about an 11 or 12 page application to procure those. I don't know if we'll get them before dry dock or during dry dock, but that will be the removal of the Bofors, the additions, and now the 01 level and the 02 level will all be 1962.
Okay, nice.
Which is, that's, and then you know what? After that project, I'm out of there, right? I can leave on that. I could leave on that note and be happy and say, okay, on to a different challenge now.
Right, on to other things. Steve's got a nice comment here. He says, that is a great set of interpretive dates, 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Oh, wow. I never thought of that, but yeah.
Right?
Yes, all those 3 decades would absolutely be covered. I love that. Who asked that question? I'm sorry.
Steve, the blue ribbon.
Oh, yes. Gotcha. Oh, yeah. 50s, 60s, 70s. There it is. Thank you.
Sir Booms a lot asks, are the twin 20 millimeters on board accurate to 1962?
Yeah, great question. Sir Booms a lot. No, they are not. Again, the ship was naked. Let's just put some 20s on there, right? So, those were removed those were removed, I believe, in the 54 dry dock period. I would have to verify that. But when they added the 3-inch 50s, I believe is when they took them off. But I would have to verify that.
Okay. So the dry dock itself, we all know what happened a few years ago with the ship. Was that just, was there something that was just kind of clismic that happened, or was this just hull degradation over time?
It was to have a catastrophic event like that, it is all things all at once, right?
Okay.
Or that's kind of how I view it. So, as Tim had probably said, and as maybe people know or don't know, the hull and 90%, the hull of a Fletcher class destroyer, 90% of the hull is 5/8 of an inch thick. Our last dry dock period was March of 65. So she had already been out of service and decommissioned January of 65. 2 months later, they say, okay, well, let's take her out, shore her up, give her a paint job. And now she can sit there in Philadelphia. Put some blanks on, things like that. So it was part just wear and tear of being in the water that long. Certainly partially salt water, mostly fresh water, 12 years in salt water, and then however many years, 47 years in fresh water. There was a belief that if in prior administrations and through prior staff that you keep anything internal, right? You do the work internally and you keep it quiet, right? That was their choice. That is their choice to make. I'm not stating that it was the wrong choice. Certainly they would have been worried about having the Navy come and claw the ship back. Right. So they said, okay, there is some degradation. Let's work to fix it internally. And so that was their philosophy for many years. Or as the Naval Park represented, that was our philosophy for many years. It's not that way now, but it was at that time. So certainly the weather, as many people know, that we had a series of seiches, right? So a seiche is, Lake Erie is known throughout the world, all right, as the place for seiches. Right. And so if someone studies the weather, meteorology, they will learn about seiches and Lake Erie. So Lake Erie is kind of on the path of, the jet stream, and you get a high wind event. It's like a bathtub. It takes a lot of the water from Cleveland and Toledo and just pushes it towards the eastern shore, which is where we are at, pushes it right into the Buffalo River. And then we're raising 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 feet. So then the water rushes away like a bathtub. It slams against the other side now. And we impacted with the bottom, which had probably been filled with silt, rocks, boulders, you name it, over time.
Right.
And then that's where we got the perforation.
Okay.
So
it's similar to what Kid experiences in Baton Rouge, with crud and debris coming down the river and hitting the ship. Tim has talked about that a lot. Mm-hmm. So although not exactly the same circumstances, are kind of similar in a way.
Well, we're all dealing with waterways, right?
Right.
You guys, the kid down there has to deal with the lowering of the Mississippi, the raising of the Mississippi in the springtime with all the snow melt coming down.
Right.
And the drought times or the droughty periods where it goes down in that 40 feet, right? That's, I think, 40 feet he always talks about. So ours is seiches. And even on the morning when the word got out on the 14th of April, we had another seiche. She was settled at about a 17-degree list. Mm-hmm. Well, we had another seiche that came in, lifted the boat up, and then slid her further down.
Wow.
To about a 37-degree list. And then that's where she eventually settled. Were we worried that she would collide with the Little Rock? Yes, we were.
Of course.
And yeah, I mean, there's not much more I can say, right? Like that's catastrophic. It was a catastrophic event. We will be covering it a lot more. We're going to be doing, our staff is going to be doing a series of episodes called we think it's going to be called Destination Dry Dock. And we are going to be showing like behind the scenes things of our meetings and staff meetings and discussing
Wonderful.
things. Yeah, it's something that we find really, so we're working on that now. And there's going to be a lot of discussions about that day. There might even be, I think there's going to be interviews with each of the staff about how we felt that morning when we came into work, things like that. So it's going to be a really wide eye opener for us, and I think for our viewers. So yeah,
Definitely.
It's going to be a very interesting, and that stems from, like NFL films, they do those behind the scenes things, whatever they're called,
Right.
and then they put them out, like ESPN puts them out, or and so we were saying, why can't we do that? So we're going to start filming our dry dock discussions that we have internally, editing them down, and then releasing them to the public. This might be another 4 months or 5 months away or something, but
Right.
That's something we're in the works with.
Yeah, because I think your tentative plan, and you've mentioned this on some of the videos on your channel, is dry dock for Sullivans and Croaker. They're going in at the same time, and it's September of next year. Is that right?
Yeah, September, October of next year is the goal. And also the goal is to have them go at the same time.
Right.
So, but talk about water forces, right? I've been looking at, so we know that the Mississippi swells. You'll know that better than I would, in the springtime or summer as all the snow melt comes down. Our peak Buffalo River swelling is in, the trends usually show it as April or May of any given year. And if we're talking about trying to go in October, we would have to make sure that the water levels, because what we have to do is we have to move the Little Rock, right? Bring her out into the Buffalo River, slide her back. We then have to cut a couple mooring posts and piers that where the Little Rock and then the Sullivans can tie up with. Those have to be removed 20 feet out of the bedrock, and then do some dredging, right? And then we can begin to move the Sullivans and the Croaker, and then slide the Little Rock back, and then make her accessible for staff. So then having this huge ramp, because she would probably go in the same area that she is right now, and so now you have this huge wide open space. So we'd have to have a new ramp system installed to get staff and visitors back onto the Little Rock as well. So
right, because even when the ship comes back from dry dock, they're not immediately ready for tourists again.
Correct.
They have to get reset back up.
Correct. Like what we did when they came originally, we took 2 years. We won't take 2 years, of course, but it took 2 years to get those ships into ship shape to be open to the public for the first time. And so, yes, I would expect that, one of the things that I'm working on now with a real dedicated group of volunteers is removing remaining artifacts, starting with the Sullivans, and then I'll move on to the Croaker. So all of that stuff, or reimagining it and put, we have to put all the bunks back into place, right? We have to, paint, because there are areas that down below that may not be open for 4 to 5 years.
Right.
So we have a lot of work to do, even when she just comes back from dry dock. She will be available, but
it's limited capacity.
Limited capacity, yes. Yeah, very true.
Now, going back to the sinking thing for a minute, what was the fix you guys did to refloat her?
Yes, so we had about 1.1 million gallons of water. Included in that was about 3,000 to 4,000 gallons of remaining fuel oil and just hydraulic and diesel. Steve is saying a lot of things there. Sorry.
Steve, I was just pulling up your question to get ready to ask him, but I want Shane to finish this thought here.
So they found that, so we had about a 5.5 foot gash from the impact with the bottom on starboard side, bringing in about 130,000 gallons of water an hour. Then we it also located, there was about a 10-foot gash on port. I do not know the origins of where that came. But obviously it was during that event, because if we had, that would have been the event that sinks us to port, not to starboard, right? Or in the opposite way, from the camera. So that occurred at some point during the sinking itself as well. So those two areas were immediately using hydraulic cement, patched up, solidified. Then they went through, we had a salvage, we had two salvage teams, one from Texas, one local, named Bidco Marine Group. And they went around and they actually found other holes, right? Those small pinpricks, dime size, quarter size, patched those up, of which I think there were about 53 or 58 of those. And then we called in the environmental firm was part of the incident command, and they started testing all the water. So now she's sealed, right, from the outside. Then we just now have to deal with the water that's already in there. And so we had huge frac tanks, about 5 huge frac tanks. All of that water would get pumped. Now, the thing we had to do was, not us, we had a naval architects here, and so they created a pumping plan. So the ship was broken into bow, midship, stern. Where's the most amount of water? And then they created a pumping plan over about 4 weeks where they could measure how much is coming out. And then if you have one that's up here, but this water level in section A in the bow is this level, you would turn on the pumps for B, get it down to the same level as A, then you can take them both down. And if C was down here, then you can have both going down till you hit the level of C, and then you turn all 3 sections on, and then she would, because the stress on the keel was still monumental, and until she came up, the keel could have broken at any time if the pumping plan didn't work. And so we relied on experts from all over the country, and the ship speaks for itself that she was able to be raised with that amount of water in her. So
they don't make them like her anymore.
No, that's true. Thank God for the riveting in the middle, welding on the ends, measuring those levels of where each water is in each compartment, how much in terms of gallons or weight is there in each compartment, and then pumping them out. So by the time you get to the bottom, they're all at the same level, and then all 3 sections could be pumped out together.
Gotcha. Let's get to Steve's question here real quick. He says, let's see. He's got 2 questions. Are you changing the ship's anodes to aluminum like Big J, New Jersey did? Mm-hmm. That's his first question. Mm-hmm. His second question, well, go ahead and answer his first one. Yeah.
Yes, like all the museum ships, at some point, if they are not staying in salt water, they added zinc. Sacrificial. Okay, so these are, that's not the cathodic protection, right? So he's talking about the zinc anodes that are the sacrificial anodes that are actually mounted onto the hull, which then those are the things that deteriorate, and they don't touch it slows down the rate of deterioration on the steel. So we had zinc anodes or sacrificial anodes. Of course, zinc doesn't work in fresh water. So they were good while the ship was in Philadelphia, but they were not sacrificing anything being here in Buffalo. So we would change to aluminum or magnesium, which is for fresh water.
Okay.
I think I'm pretty sure I'm getting that right. There's a lot of subjects we're covering in my head. My brain, gotcha. I'm going to sleep well tonight. But yeah, zinc is for salt water. Magnesium, aluminum is for fresh water, and those get sacrificed instead of the steel itself.
Okay. He says, since the raising, remediation, and repair of Sullivans, has there been any noticeable signs of advanced interior bulkhead deck plate corrosion due to the immersion of water from 2022?
Yeah, another good question. So the question seems to be that is, even though she's out of water, there is still corrosion going on and degradation to the bulkheads, the bimetallic welding and things because of the sinking. Not any more than was probably already there, I would answer that with. Certainly the bimetallic welding where the deck houses hit the deck, you have partial aluminum, partial steel, you're welding those things together. Always an area of quicker degradation. But off the top, no, I don't know of a space that once the water got pumped out, mostly the degradation stopped because we put in also a survivability plan. So the crew and the director of operations developed a stable survivability plan. So you're now getting it's getting cleaned. It gets dehumidifiers and heat in the summer and heaters in the winter, changing gaskets, things like that. So there isn't one section of the ship that said, "Oh yeah, this went to wasted metal since the sinking." I have not found that.
Right. So I think I asked him this question, or I at least meant to. With both ships, when you get them in dry dock, what are you looking to have done, and what's on your wish list? Things you would like to have done.
Great question. Well, we are still kind of formulating those right now.
Okay.
Certainly, all of the certainly all of the at the waterline, all of the steel replaced or double-plated steel if we need it, or just absolute steel replacement. I think for the Sullivans, kind of my wish list is to verify that the two funnels are in good condition and there's no real degradation of the bolts and the mountings with that. Certainly checking the tripod mast. Then there's other steel work that can be done, maybe like around the bridge, the extended wraparound bridge needs some work to her deck. Strengthening maybe the main deck if it needs it in some certain areas. I know the kid is working on the stern of, I think they're doing some steel replacement on the stern on the main deck. So really our focus is get the hull and the skin stable.
Right.
We know that there will be changes to this. We know, talking lessons learned from other vessels, including the kid, that things don't always seem the way they appear. And we're getting prepared for that there might be work that needs to be added on because once she gets stripped of paint and things like that. So for the Croaker, it is also the same thing. Certainly along the splash zone waterline, strengthening the steel, working on the pitting that's happened in those areas of the Croaker as well are the primary focus.
Shane, you've got a new subscriber.
Hey, well, great, Steve. Thank you. Yeah,
Steve has subscribed. That's amazing, Steve.
Yeah, thanks so much, Steve.
Quick shout out to Steve here. Steve, he is what I call he's my Queen Mary guy. When I need to know things about the Queen Mary, he is to the Queen Mary what you and Tim are to your respective ships.
Oh, wow. Excellent. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so if you ever need to know anything about the Queen or you want to have a chat with him, he's an encyclopedia.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah,
that would be great. I've never been out. I mean, I haven't visited when I've been out there, but I mean, my word, beautiful vessel, right?
Absolutely.
Unbelievably luxurious.
Sir
I'll have to
Booms a
learn
lot.
more.
Sir Booms a lot says, "Do you
Yeah.
have any specific areas on Croaker in mind that you want to work on?"
Well, yes, there's a lot of areas that we could work on. Uh, in dry dock itself, I think it's just the skin is the most important thing. Um, if we need to verify the superstructure, good night, Steve. Thank you.
Take it easy, Steve.
Yeah. If we have to verify the superstructure, the framing, things like that, we can have things inspected. But the skin is the most important. We did have, again, because of the bottom and the way we're nested, we were rubbing. We did have a hole in the 6A ballast tank, which we've foamed and sealed. All right, but I want to get the foam out of there and seal it back up properly, and it's right underneath, which is almost impossible to get to because of, again, the silt buildup. There's not much space anymore between the bottom of the Buffalo River and the keel of the Croaker. So we need to dig that out so she has a much wider, not berth, but a much wider gap between the keel and the Buffalo River.
Amazing. I've been wondering about this. Of course, I know you'll be able to speak to your sub, but some subs, Kavala and Drum are on land. I know why the Drum's on land. I'm not sure about Kavala. Your sub is in the water. What leads into whatever decision you make, whether you're going to put a ship on land or leave it in the water? Because I understand that they're meant to be in the water. That's where they should be. Am I right?
Yes. Certainly for any vessel you have to make sure that she's stable enough in the framing that she can hold her own weight. We just don't have enough land, right?
I see.
They should be in the water for just my personal choice as well. They should be in the water.
Right.
Gives it more authentic, especially now with the gales of November. She's really rocking, and to get people on board while it's, you get a little flavor of what life was like aboard, our Gato class sub. But yeah, I think for the Drum, it was because was she ever pushed onto land from a hurricane or anything, or?
Hurricane George's, from what I remember, she suffered some significant damage from that hurricane. And as I understand it, that's why she was put on shore.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure about Kavala. Now George
Probably
is also
the same thing.
Maybe so, but I know also Drum and Alabama both took some damage from Katrina, but it was minimal because even Katrina couldn't move that big mighty A, and
Right.
Not a whole lot anyway. And
Right.
Drum was already on land by that point.
Yes. Well, certainly with the Stewart and the Kavala, there was a hurricane that knocked them kind of, even though they were already on land, they kind of fell out of their cradles a little bit. Mm-hmm. So that's probably, I would imagine, just right off the top, the weather would be one of the reasons as an explanation as to why they were on land. We just don't have that land.
Okay.
And I don't know if we'd be able to build the infrastructure, even if we did have that land, to get that kind of ramp, right out of the water,
right
into a cradle on land. The shoreline is not conducive to that.
Gotcha. Shane, I think I'm spent.
Wow, I know, me too. Yeah, this is a great conversation. Is there anything that anyone wants to? There's a lot of statements. Thank you, Sir Brooms, a lot. He visited the Queen Mary. Make sure you say hello to Steve. Does Steve interface with is he on?
He's Mary, out there quite a bit, as I understand.
Interesting.
Oh yeah, it would not surprise me at all if you're out there one random weekend, and yeah, he's there roaming the ship.
Oh, yeah. Very, very cool. Teresa, Lego History Sam, that's great. How are you again? Hopefully something to go to do well. Yes. Do I have any dates of when she'll be shipped off? No, not yet. We are shooting for October 2025, but that hasn't been fully decided yet. Are we going to open the torpedo tubes? I'd love to open the torpedo tubes. We'd have to get the wrench. We'd have to borrow that from the COD because, of course, they have the wrench to open the torpedo tubes. But yeah, I think just to, when the COD was in dry dock, they did a very good inspection of the torpedo tubes. They installed the doors again. If there was any degradation there, I'd love to get all of that. So, get her buttoned up a little bit more.
Well, that's really great. And I know from talking to Tim, all of you guys, you museum ships, you really communicate well with each other. And COD has been a dry dock, Kid's been a dry dock, and you've got a Gato class sub going, you got a Fletcher class sub going. So you can talk to those guys for their experiences. And I mean, should be a little bit smooth sailing for you guys, hopefully.
Yes. And that's, again, when we were talking earlier about building relationships, this is a prime example.
Yes.
I have at my fingertips, phone or email, years of experience. And all I have to do is be willing to say, you know what, guys, I don't have a clue. You know it. Please share your knowledge and your lessons learned. And it's all, we always say, one fleet. It's, it is very tight knit. And you have to work those relationships as well. You have to be willing to, answer their questions and do things for them as well. And so it's not a transactional relationship, but it's just that they trust me that I will help them find an answer. I trust them that they will help me find an answer. But that takes a while to foster and to develop. And yeah, I mean, we have a good relationship with the Cobia. They are also planning a dry dock. So another Gato class is going to dry dock. So Karen and I have talked a few times about, oh, what are you guys doing? What are you going to do with this? What are you guys going to do with that? Or how are you guys fundraising for this? All of that stuff. So happy to continue working with the Cobia in Wisconsin as well.
Of course.
Do that. Yeah. Jolie, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Trying to throw out all the facts at once. I no doubt messed up in certain places. But thank you so much for your support. It's appreciated. Sir Boomsalot and Eric. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Sir Boomsalot. Sir Boomsalot. I can't even talk anymore. Oh, that's funny. But yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the questions, and we dove deeper than I potentially expected us to, but no problem there. Yeah. And then this will be good for fans of your channel. So everyone, if you're watching on the Buffalo Naval Park, please review and subscribe to All American Travels here. Because,
much appreciated.
Yeah, he's going to be getting into more of the history videos, as he'd mentioned, over the next 6 months or a year. And it'll be exciting to see that. You're always welcome to come up to Buffalo, do some filming if you want to do that, or meet face to face and sit down again. And I got to get down to the kid, say hi to Tim, potentially say hi to you and Parks and everyone down there. And that's what the community is all about. It's one fleet, right?
Definitely. Thank you so much for talking with me and having me on. I really do appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Happy to. I'm so glad we made the connection through Tim. And anytime you want to do this again, we're happy to do it. And everyone, thanks so much for all of your support. Looks like we had some good questions and some good engagement. And you know what, everyone, we will see you again soon. So from James at All America Travels, from Shane at Buffalo Naval Park, we thank you so much for being here, and I hope you enjoyed.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.